Before we get into today's episode, I want to ask you a quick favour. If you're getting value from any of our podcasts, and I genuinely hope you are, could you take just 30 seconds right now and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? It sounds like a small thing, but a rating would make a huge difference, and it'll take less time than pouring a cup of coffee. G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Most farming businesses are sitting on far more value than they realise. The land, the genetics, the product, the story. And yet most of that value walks out the gate as a raw commodity priced by someone else at a margin that leaves almost nothing on the table. Today's guest is someone who looked at exactly that problem and decided to do something about it. Vanessa Bell took what she knew, who she knew, and what she grew, and built a luxury brand that sells Australian merino wool directly to premium markets around the world. No middleman, no waiting for commodity prices to improve, just a farming woman with grit, global contacts, and a very clear vision. Her path to get there is unlike anything I've come across. Vanessa's career began on the international fashion circuit, working with global houses including Valentino, Armani, and Dior. She then married farmer Philip Bell, moved to rural New South Wales, and built a life at Emu Creek in Walcha, one of Australia's finest marine wool regions. Inspired by a merino blanket passed down from her grandmother, she launched a luxury knitwear label, each garment crafted in Italy by a family-run business from superfine merino wool. Vanessa's goal is to utilise the wool grown at Emu Creek for all her future collections. In 2025, she was awarded a gold in fashion and textiles and a silver in agriculture at the Women Changing the World Global Awards. She's a keynote speaker, a passionate advocate for sustainable luxury, and proof that vertical integration doesn't have to mean you build a factory. Sometimes it just means knowing exactly who you are and who your customer is. Vanessa's story is going to make you think differently about what's sitting right under your feet on your own property. So if you're part of the next generation trying to find your niche, your contribution, your reason to be in the family business, I want you to listen closely because this is what thinking differently actually looks like. So without further delay, Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Ben, it is such a joy to be here today. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it'll be great. I think this will be a really unique episode and I'm looking forward to it. So, Vanessa, where I want to kick off with is you've gone from working with fashion houses like Valentino or Dior, things that don't mean too much to me, but anyone that likes fashion and is involved in that world, I'm sure it'll mean a lot to them, in places like Europe. And now you've ended up, and I'm not saying ended up in a bad way, I mean it in a very good way, but you've ended up on a sheep station in Walcha in New South Wales. I want you to talk me through that journey and how the hell did you get there?
Well, Ben, it sounds like a sharp pivot, but I would say it's, without giving my age away, it's been a bunch of chapters to get me to this point. I grew up in Sydney in a really loving, wonderful family in Middle Harbour in Sydney. So I had a really wonderful, joyful childhood, actually, exploring. Was down on the bush in Middle Harbour, so I would spend a lot of time fishing and out on the boat. And so, I had this amazing time growing up in Sydney. And then, I had this remarkable experience where I started modelling at the age of 15. And at the time I was selected to do, well, bizarrely enough, I always say this with caution, basically my first experience in fashion was in the back streets of King's Cross in Sydney, which always sounds dubious. Very dubious. But literally I had a photographer and a makeup artist take a Polaroid of me. And at that time I was with an agent called Jane Cameron, and that one particular Polaroid, literally I took that wearing nothing more than my grandfather's jumper at the time and a pair of jeans into 54 Park Street in Sydney and saw the editor of Harper's Bazaar, and she booked me on the spot. So I had my first job working for Harper's, and that very same Polaroid I then took into Australian Vogue and was booked for Australian Vogue for my second gig. So that was kind of how my fashion journey started at the tender age of 15. And, my parents have always been very supportive and particularly of education. So I finished my high school certificate. But then, in the middle of studying school holidays, I would go off and do amazing shoots with Japanese clients, or, I was all over the place. So literally at the age of 18, I took off to, I think, goodness, I'm going back now in time, but I think my first trip was to Vienna. I literally lived in share accommodation on the outskirts of Vienna at a place called Hütteldorf, and just started working for European clients there, and then went straight to Tokyo to work for the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, who run the fashion business there. So it was kind of, that was my right into fashion, high fashion, worked all over the world doing everything from catalogue shoots. Just a fun story. I remember being in Japan and I did a catalogue shoot for a golf company, and they had flown out a wonderful expert in teaching me how to play golf, just purely to see that I was getting my positioning right for the shoot, right through to, doing pregnancy catalogues. And I remember my father being horrified as they sent him home catalogues at the age of 19, seeing me in these pretend pregnancy outfits. So, look, fashion was just an absolute joy. I think, and I've spoken about this before, I think people give the fashion industry really, it has obviously negative connotations around unrealistic beauty standards and how women are treated. But I have to say my experience in fashion was nothing short of joyful. It was just being surrounded by super creative people and, amazing designs and color. And I thrived in it. I really loved it. So then coming back to, my father is a fellow chartered accountant. And so he rang me at the tender age of, I think I was 23 at the time, and said, Vanessa, you need to come home and get a real job. So I thought I had a real job, Dad, I was pulling in huge amounts of money. But anyway, I came back and had my first job working for a financial planning company in Sydney, and it was literally a one-stop shop for finance. So I learnt very quickly as the receptionist. I still maintain this, the power of connection. I really took it in as my business to learn everyone that was coming through the front door, and managed to negotiate my salary. I think at the time was $33,000. And I said to the managing director, that's not going to cut it. I've just come from Tokyo and I was walking down the runway for 10 grand a day. So I just said to him, can we improve on that? But the bottom line is I learnt from a wonderful lady who was my manager at that point, and she'd gone from being at Ernst & Young with a team of 2,000 people to just myself and the other receptionist. And she said to me, you have sort of a desire to learn. So she basically taught me everything around facilities management, how to run a big business at scale. And that was really my sort of entry into the finance world. I then took on a position issuing performance-based bonds for the civil engineering market with a AAA rated surety company. And that in itself was I just loved everything about it. So I would be ringing, the guys that were head of Lend-Lease or, other massive big companies. And for me, it was just monopoly money. And it was really about negotiating commissions and being able to get those bonds back into the surety. So, charging extension premium and so on. So really understanding the importance of negotiating and, getting to know, again, relationships. I had a spreadsheet. I know it sounds, there's lots of people that have done this, but I had a spreadsheet. I knew Jimmy's children. I knew when they were playing rugby. For me, it was all about establishing those relationships so that I could leverage those relationships to get the bonds back in on time. And then I basically decided that I wanted to learn more about advertising, and I could see how it was important to be able to really understand how to market and how to engage people in a more meaningful way. And so, again, I suppose with the same sass and attitude, I marched myself into Clemenger BBDO in North Sydney and spoke with the MD at the time, who was an American guy, and his name was Jim. And he said to me, well, we don't actually have any positions going at the moment, but my general manager is an absolute nightmare. None of us can work with her. If you can work with Melinda, you've got the job. And so I said, oh, fantastic. Great.
Challenge accepted.
Anyway, Melinda and I got on like a house on fire because I'm very direct and very black and white, and, every so often would just give it back to her because I had actually nothing to fear or nothing to lose. And there's lots of fun stories that came out of that. But Clemenger BBDO was really also an interesting space for me in business because I learnt a lot about how to, really talk to the consumer and looking at unmet needs and how to match those needs. So advertising was quite the journey. And then from there, straight into the wine business. And then I went back into media. So I was part of the executive team and the original founders of an independent media agency called Slingshot. And so I was with Slingshot for 13 years. So yeah, a really robust career, which was clients such as Sony, Colorbond, they were, amazing. Disney, really fabulous clients to work with. So learning again how to leverage opportunities, in particular media, so that you can, I suppose part of what we're discussing today and for people on the land, looking at how they can leverage their assets. And so in that particular situation, it was about leveraging media assets, but that same philosophy is something that I've carried through today.
Well, I've got bated breath how this U-turn happened, Vanessa. I can hear a linear path. Where do we get the big pivot?
So the big pivot was actually polo. I met my amazing farmer husband, Philip, at the polo, and it was a gig that my friend had said, oh, look, I need some help with a PR tent. Is there any chance that you could come along? And to be honest, I was not really remotely interested in going or really sort of being around people. At that time, I had been going through was on the back of quite a tricky divorce. And so I thought, oh, why not? Anyway, I went and met some really wonderful people, and that was sort of the foundation and the beginning of our relationship. And so from that point, we had quite a whirlwind of a romance. Literally, within 3 months, we were very much together.
He snaffled you.
Yes. And then, I think it was 6 months and we were pregnant. Typical farmer, he was like, we'll be together forever. And, I can see that you're getting older. And I was like, oh, gee, thanks. And he was like, no, we need to get you pregnant, which is exactly what happened. Anyway, it's been this amazing, now very long relationship and marriage. And I'm so blessed. I have 3 beautiful stepchildren. And together, Philip and I have Charlie. And now we have Stella, our granddaughter. So it's just been quite the journey because we are definitely a team. And that, again, is something that I know a lot of farming families can relate to. Philip and I are probably different in the sense that we have very different business skills. So obviously I've got a commercial background from being in Sydney, but also my experience in fashion globally. But we're both very entrepreneurial and we do things at scale, and we are both people that really enjoy taking calculated risks, which I know is not for everyone. I know that, some people are quite happy just doing their thing, and that's absolutely fine too. But I think particularly for the female listeners, I would really encourage people to get outside and think about things differently and take those risks, because with risk comes reward.
Succession isn't a couple of meetings and a document. It's a decade of deliberate work. The first generation builds it, the second generation grows it, and the third generation loses it. Not because they were careless, but because nobody did the preparation. Our Roadmap Workshop is where that preparation starts, and I'll be facilitating it personally 2 days on the Sunshine Coast, August the 26th and 27th this year. I've got one event planned, and early bird tickets won't last. If you're serious about breaking that pattern, now's the time to move. Go to agricoach.com.au/take action. That's agricoach.com.au/take action.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And look, most farmers, when you dial down to it, Vanessa, are a massive risk takers. I mean, you talk to the local person in the city and say, this is what farmers do. And they're like, oh my God, these are the biggest risk takers ever. So I think it's just what you're comfortable with. So talk us through the business side of things, Vanessa. You've obviously got the farming operations that you and your husband and the family run. And then you've also got the off-farm vertically integrated side. Could you just give us a quick overview of what that looks like so everyone understands?
Yes, certainly. So my husband and I run a mixed farming enterprise at scale, and we've done that consistently. So, we've had property stations in far western New South Wales. More recently, we bought and then sort of sold in 2024 Kuplakarapa Station, which was the largest land holding on the eastern fall of the Great Dividing Range, and different, I suppose, in the sense that that was freehold versus other major properties that we've had that have been leases in perpetuity. So again, more opportunity with freehold, which is a whole other discussion. But yes, we've had lots of different properties together. And this opportunity to buy Emu Creek came up this time last year, and it was just, too good to be true, really. To be honest, the house is magnificent. It's a beautiful old property. It's 6 generations. It had been the first time on the market for 161 years. But in truth, as wonderful as the house was, it was the shearing shed that got me across the line with 19 stands and just steeped in history. And wow. In fact, we have our own museum on the property that has the original steam engine that used to run the shearing shed. So it's just a wonderful merino property, especially on the back of Kuplakarapa, which is absolutely, huge cattle station, and very much Philip's ambition and drive sits with cattle. But that said, we wanted to grow superfine merino wool again. Historically, Philip's family are all from Goulburn, so again, a wonderful region for growing merino wool. But because of my business in knitwear, we were really wanting to grow wool fit for purpose on the back of conversations that I'd had with my Italian partners. So yes, we're in Walcha, and so there's different aspects to what we do here. We still run cattle here, but in terms of large-scale farming, we have 2 stations in far north Queensland, which are about 5 hours west of Port Douglas, Bellevue and Nitram stations. So that's where we're absolutely running cattle at scale there. So, again, just as a side note, we're heading into such a dry season here at Walcha. We're looking down the barrel of yet another drought. And so, again, I would urge, it's part of the inspiration, I think, for other people out there thinking about vertical integration is, especially when we look at things like buy from the bush, when you're looking down the barrel of a drought, it is so imperative to not only diversify in your farming interests, but also to be able to look at other opportunities that can help support that farming business when times get really tough. And, I can honestly say I was really privileged to be part of the Buy from the Bush campaign, which I might add was wonderful because it really showcased that farmers don't want a handout. They just wanted to be able to showcase off-farm income in a way that, shows that we're able to produce wonderful, in my case, it was bespoke baby blankets, but we're able to produce wonderful things as part of that entire value chain on farm.
And so the vertically integrated business, just for everyone listening, again, just what does that look like?
Okay, so for me, it started as a point of need and then became, I suppose, it was a combination of need and reinvention. So it started as a handcrafted baby blanket business. So when I first had Charlie in Goulburn, I was looking for something, Brootalbin, which is actually much colder and further south than Goulburn. I was looking for a baby blanket to keep him warm, and my mother very kindly handed me a baby blanket that was knitted by my great-grandmother back in 1940. So it was this wonderful family heirloom. It was 100% pure merino wool. And even though it was felted from wear, it had this gorgeous weight to it. It was just beautiful. And I remember thinking at the time, why can't you buy these? Cutting a very long story short, I set up that business and it went from literally my kitchen table to then being sold all over the world. And I feel very passionate about the power of connection. And as that business evolved and it became this, wonderful story, it was also named after my great-grandmother. People kept calling me Sarah. It was really confusing. But also through LinkedIn, I connected with my now designer, Natasha Lennart, and she had worked for Victoria Beckham as her lead knitwear designer for 10 years. And we connected and she'd actually just done this wonderful launch for Victoria. And I reached out and said, wow, I love what you're doing. That's amazing. We struck up a friendship and she basically said, why don't you return to your fashion roots? This is something that's, really a lot about. It's something that we could do together. And so that's where it was born. So my great-grandmother's beautiful knitting became the inspiration and genesis for my business now. So what does that look like in terms of our overall farming business? For me, it was understanding that I could be at both ends of the value chain, that I could basically grow wool fit for purpose, that I could really lean into my high fashion background, that I could produce these extraordinarily gorgeous sweaters or jumpers that were, like my baby blankets, become heirlooms. There were so many layers to this, Ben. It was not just about creating fashion. As I experienced with the baby blankets, I became really aware of the benefits and the attributes of merino wool, which coming from the city, I'd previously not understood. I could understand when I was on the runway that all of the top designers, Armani, Yoko Kushino, everyone that I was in contact with over there, they were all using merino because it drapes so beautifully and it's just such a gorgeous fiber. So I could see that, how it was playing out on the runway in fashion. But then in real time, when I actually was in the shed and I could be with the sheep and I could understand how, it was all these thermoregulating properties, how it was the only fiber that a child should actually sleep with because of its regulating properties. All of those things I had previously been unaware of. And it was that aha moment that I could own this space, that I could really create something that was built on love and longevity, but also translate in a way that was meaningful to consumers that had previously not been done before.
And so you manufacture these overseas, don't you? So you've got designers coming in, you're then contracting it to get it made in Italy. Is that right?
Everything that I designed myself,
Yes.
and even though Natasha's taking care of all of the technical side of things, it's
Yep.
because I've got a very clear vision after being in fashion for such a long time. They're absolutely my designs. But then Natasha lives in Italy and my yarn partners. So made in Italy was a conscious decision. I did not want to work with partners that did not understand the fibre and the way that I understood it as a merino grower. So also, it was the ethical and responsible business pathways. I wanted to know who makes our clothing. I wanted to understand that there's a whole shift going on out there with consumers. It all comes down to trust. And so provenance, heritage, understanding who makes the clothing, that's hugely important. And I wanted to work with that heritage of craftsmanship, which my yarn suppliers, Lanacadata, Telenio 1900 in particular, understand. And then to be able to grow that wool fit for purpose. So to be able to sit down with those yarn suppliers and say, okay, what do you need? And so for them, it was being RWS certified. For them, it meant that we shared the same values. So having these discussions was really important. And so for me, it wasn't just about making more fashion. It was about saying, okay, well, if I become a Woolmark licensee, which I achieved last year, then I know that all of our garments have been rigorously tested to meet those eco-credentials. But also, I need to be able to meet that consumer through transparency and say, okay, yes, I will do the hard yards. Yes, I will become an RWS certified wool grower. Yes, you will have visibility over what does that biodiversity and flock management look like. And so, I think that's incredibly important for the consumer, and that all builds in trust. I was actually just speaking at the Women in Wool conference a few weeks ago down in Ballarat, and I was really talking about how luxury begins at the source and how experience is the new luxury for consumers, because we have been sold a lie for such a long time by so many of these larger houses. So, for example, we used to equate quality with some of these big fashion houses, but to cut corners and to meet the fact that synthetic fibres have been optimized for speed and fast fashion has just been able to completely take over everything that we know to be in fashion now. I felt like there's actually an opportunity for me to stand up as a disruptor and to speak on behalf of other growers in Australian wool to say, hang on a minute, Australian wool can be positioned as the future of luxury fashion. We need to reduce microplastic pollution for not only the health of the planet, but to also get consumers to understand that they're actually wearing petrochemicals. I mean, there's all these papers that have been done now on the terrible things that petrochemicals are doing to the health of children in particular. I think, some of the major corporations have just been sued over having such levels of petrochemicals that are well above what is deemed to be acceptable. So, look, it's a really broad discussion, but for me, I really wanted to develop something that was not just about selling wool as a product. It was about selling wool as a product, as a commodity, but then really understanding with intention, with purpose, where I sat within that value chain. And then beyond that, as a brand, how I could also then advocate for the fibre globally.
It's an interesting story, and I couldn't agree more. The one thing that's popped into my mind as you were just explaining that, Vanessa, was, and you managed to do when so many other people talk, because I constantly hear people say, we've got these ideas for a business, we want to go off farm. And I'm talking probably to the next generation here, like leveraging off what they've actually got. So a lot of people talk, very few people actually do, which is what you've done. Can you talk me through when you first had this idea and thought, wow, I've got this idea, and you came back to the family and you said, hey, I've got this idea, this is what I'm looking at doing. How did that discussion go? Sorry, Vanessa, just to give you some context, because I know when I started both of my businesses, when I first came back, my wife said, you're batshit crazy. What are you talking about? So I'd just be curious to hear what your family said when you came home.
Well, I think for me, as I said, it was really something that came out of need and reinvention. So looking out the window, I was no longer looking out at Macquarie Street. I was looking out at a flock of merino wool down at Brett Albans. So for me, it was about understanding how I could utilise my business skills, passion and ability into something that had purpose. But I think my approach has never really been centered on identifying a safe position. It was more around solving a problem with intention. So, for me, it was about keeping my son warm in its infancy. And then that genesis and the being able to sort of go through that process as a Woolmark licensee and as a grower, I really wanted to be able to create something with legacy. So I think my family were like, well, that makes sense. You've got the business skills, you've got the understanding, but you also have that very clear clarity around what I'm solving. And I think this is where people really get it wrong. They think, oh, I've got this fantastic idea. But unless you're actually meeting consumer demand or you're actually solving a problem, and I go back to this with regards to growing wool, people is what does it take to really keep the demand of wool up in this country? And I maintain that whether or not you agree with mulesing or not, as far as being able to grow wool, we need to actually understand where is that commodity ending up. And, if that is going to be, in my case, high-end, luxury, beautiful garments, then you need to make sure that you're solving that problem for that consumer. So I'm not sure if they thought I was crazy or not, but I think it's, it's played out in a really great way. And I think it's brought the family together. As I said, when talking about succession, my stepson Digby is very much involved in our farming as our overseer here at Emu Creek. And, I have Dig very much involved with our WS programs. So I think it's a holistic, we work together as a team, and I think valuing everyone in that equation is really important. I think the other thing I would say though, getting back to synthetics, everyone keeps saying to me, and I had this with my baby blanket range as well, oh, your baby blankets are so expensive and your sweaters are so expensive. And I would really maintain that, I feel really there's a responsibility to create something that honours craftsmanship, quality, integrity over time. So I remember standing up, I was out at Condobolin and speaking at a function years ago about my baby blankets, and there's one in every crowd, and this woman stood up and she said, Vanessa, your baby blankets are so expensive. And I said, you know what? If you would like to go down to Kmart and buy yourself some synthetics for $150 or, $10, knock yourself out. I said, but what you're buying is a baby blanket that's been handcrafted. It takes up to 4 months to make. And, if I look at my great-grandmother's baby blanket, that same blanket went through 10 children and it's still functional, beautiful, amazing. And I would say that the same with my sweaters. As I said, going back to Made in Italy, I wanted it to be the case that it's an investment piece. And, some would say that it's probably against any business model to make something that is so beautiful and such good quality that it will last for 10 years. One would argue, where's the frequency in that and how is that actually going to turn out for you? But I think that commitment to quality and not shying away from that, not discounting my product and being really, really true to the fact that it's important as part of the circular economy. So, for example, the laws are really changing around how you produce fashion, and that every garment, for example, moving forward will have to have its own passport, like an animal moving stock, it will have to have its own passport or identification code. And that's really important for brands such as myself, because when you are producing quality and say, like the sweater that I have on at the moment retails for $750, I appreciate that is more than most people in the market, particularly in Australia, are prepared to purchase. But it's accessible luxury, and that particular garment, if it's registered, will hit the circular economy again. And I know, for example, eBay have a wonderful program that are doing this, and it will retain its value over time. So that is the commitment to recycling, being able to hold its value over time. And then, of course, at the end of its very long shelf life, you can bury it and it will return, it will fully biodegrade and return valuable nutrients back to the soil. So it's beyond just that. For me, it's a whole big, I'm probably going off piste here, but it's a very big conversation around every aspect of the business.
Vanessa, one of the questions that I've quite often asked a lot of people that have been successful is around what would you do if you could go back and speak to your 25-year-old self? And the most common thing is they said, if I went back when I was younger, I'd actually tell myself to back yourself more often. I had all these ideas when I was young and I was energized and enthused, and I just didn't have the self-confidence to do it. This is a pretty big thing to bite off and chew, and you're obviously traveling the world, you're creating a new market, you're doing something different, you're not just going for the race to the bottom on price. What made you back yourself?
Self-belief, I think, is, and as my mentor would say, a happy heart is a magnet for miracles. And I think that's the combination of the two is really, really important. And also, I would say, to my 25-year-old self, I have always had a really unusual life. I've partied with everyone from Van Halen in Tokyo to, I've roller skated through castles with Niki Lauda's, I've had really a bizarre background in many, many cases. So I would say don't shy away from really amazing experiences, live big, dream big, because what you put out there is what you get back. And, I feel like for me, it's always been that observer. So I remember thinking, go back to that analogy of roller skating through a castle for Niki Lauda's birthday party. I just remember thinking at the time, look at all these amazing people. And again, being on the runway, I remember the first time I did a Valentino wearing a $40,000 dress, walking down the runway. Those sorts of out-of-body experiences is where you learn. So pushing yourself, being out there, doing things that are so far out of your comfort zone that you're almost terrified. I know it's not for everyone, but I actually really love that. That's where I learn. And I feel like that is the key. And I would say to that 25-year-old, don't stop. Don't stop being you and continue to learn. And even now, I'm really immersed and really fascinated with the discoverability of a brand through AI. So I'm consistently learning. And I think that that's something that I would encourage other people out there is don't just think, oh, I've been to uni, that's it. Life is about talking to the truck drivers, getting out there, forcing yourself to do things that are out of your comfort zone, whether or not it's public speaking. And I would just like to say I also really believe in giving back as part of that. And I'm happy to share the link with you for your show notes. But in June, I'm actually doing a masterclass on visibility and owning your voice and being able to, whether or not you're a brand or you're someone that's sitting at the kitchen table, looking out into the paddocks as we speak right now, thinking, I've got this idea, what can I do? So yes, I'd like to be able to invite you or your guests to be part of that masterclass. And again, I think it's important to give back and to lead the future so that those 25-year-olds that we were once, many years ago for me now, have that sense of being able to ask for help and to seek out mentorship.
It's interesting. I just want to circle back to something you said right back near the beginning, which sort of tweaked my interest. And I think it ties back into a lot about what you said. But you talked about your suppliers in Italy. So the ones who create the garments, I'm guessing from a know-nothing, that they're the people that knit the sweaters and get them set up, is you called them partners, not suppliers. Why did you call them partners and not suppliers?
Again, because of the power of connection. I went to Magnifico Pini, who, for context, is one of the most elite production houses globally. And they're closed. They don't open their books to anyone. And I reached out to Martina and I said to her, I really value what you're doing in terms of your zero waste policy. And I really feel that our values are really aligned. And so that is where I sit. My values are courage, innovation, and integrity. And I think when I call them partners, because they absolutely are, I wanted to work with a production partner that was innovative, that had the same passion for the fiber that I do, that had the same understanding of high fashion. So there's lots of producers globally that can just pump out clothing at mass and even within the fiber space. But I didn't want that. I wanted someone that really shared my vision and would celebrate as we evolved. And that's exactly what happened. Martina called me literally the next morning from her car, and the production house is in an area called Forlì in northern Italy. And she rang me and she said, you're the first person globally that's ever reached out to me that is a wool grower, that has your experience in high fashion. And she said, yes, we do share the same values, particularly around women in leadership and really encouraging other women to come up through the ranks. And we just absolutely hit it off over a coffee. And, I've had everything from back in March, I had the official launch of my knitwear here at Emu Creek. And we had the Emu Creek Long Lunch, which was an extraordinary event. I had Channel 7 there. And now I'm pleased to say we've had over 60,000 views on that experience and on the launch of my event. And that was something that Magnifico Pini were just so joyful about. And this is, I can't actually name their clients because they are so confidential and very, very high end. But, to have a company like that agree to work with me when I've literally just contacted them out of the blue based on the same passion, the same values. It's really important, especially as you scale. And I suppose I just wanted to go back and say, with regards to my baby blanket business, that's something that's ticking over in the background, and I still have my baby blanket clients, but that's obviously not a business that you can scale because it's handcrafted. These are obviously machine knits. But on saying that, so for example, the sweater that I have on is the puff wheat sweater. Now, this particular stitch was derived from my baby blanket business, and it was a program that we needed to work with the Italians that took time. It's never been produced anywhere in the world before. It's a first to market stitch based on that heritage of my baby blankets. And likewise, I have a chevron which is knitted through the garments, and that chevron is also a nod to climate change and being able to choose wool for a healthier life and planet. But also that chevron also derived from my baby blanket range. So that is a branding icon. It's a nod so that when you see a Vanessa Bell sweater, you think, oh, okay, that's a Vanessa Bell sweater. And it's part of that wool is the solution and not part of the problem. And that, again, I don't expect our consumers to be quite as invested as I am. But when you're talking about a brand that is really anchored in purpose and intention, again, I go back to when you're talking about people on farm, when they're thinking about that whole integration, I would really encourage people to think about what's your end game? Like, what do you actually want to achieve? Who is the consumer? What are you wanting to deliver for them? Because it's always value. And you would know that as an agri coach, you have to deliver value. But that doesn't mean that you have to deliver value in a way that undermines your values, which is why I raise the fact that I don't discount. I just don't. I believe in giving back in different ways, but that's not part of my model. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the entire wholesale model has effectively died, and that in order to build in anything that you're doing off farm, and for me, it's just in this particular case, fashion as a brand, but you need to scale through community, advocacy and community. And again, I go back to my Emu Creek launch. I mean, I've had people there from the UAE. I had people there from Singapore. That community at scale globally is integral to your success.
So talk me through the end game. 10 years, you just mentioned the word end game. 10 years from now, and that's not the ultimate end game because I'm going to ask a further on question, but 10 years from now, waving the magic wand, what's your vision?
Well, I think it'll still be very much around farming at a large scale. I would suspect Philip and I would be looking at trying to have some base for retirement. But as far as my personal goals, it's very much around developing my knitwear and to also leverage my assets. And that is, it's about being a leader that is values-led and being able to give back. Those things are really important to me. So, I always say that I walk with clarity, I choose with purpose, and I create with legacy in mind. I really mean that. I think that there's a lot of people out there that sort of are in corporate environments, or they look at values and they're just words that are plucked from thin air. But I actually really live those things. So for 10 years down the track, yes, do I want to be, still riding my horse and cooking up a storm and being with my family and enjoying watching our children thrive as they become adults? Absolutely. But on, a business level, I just feel like, really the sky's the limit. And that's everything from land acquisition through to having a really globally recognized position, either as a designer, as a luxury knitwear designer, but also as a person that is really positioning Australian wool as the future of luxury fashion.
So what do you want people to say about Vanessa Bell 100 years from now?
Well, they might get me confused with Virginia Woolf's sister, the painter. But look, I would hope that they would say I was a values-led leader that was really trying to change the narrative of what it means to be a woman in agriculture, but also really looking to position Australian wool as the future of luxury fibre.
Awesome. Now, to any young people out there, because I think we've got an amazing next generation coming through in agriculture that's probably as innovative as they've been for many years, sitting there going, well, I don't have your experience, Vanessa. I don't have your contacts. I don't have your experience in being able to build the relationships. What bit of advice would you give those young men or women that are looking to vertically integrate or diversify off farm?
Well, I think it also comes down to just starting from the very beginning, having that belief in yourself. And I think I was very fortunate. I had a father that was teaching me computer programming when I was 7. He was, to this day, I spoke to him yesterday, he had his 88th birthday yesterday, and I was talking to him about all this new coding that I'm writing. And he always encouraged me to just do whatever I wanted to do, really to think big. And, you can always strip down an idea or strip down an experience. You don't need to start with the contacts. You don't have to have the weird and wonderful experiences that I've had. But what you do need is to have grit, determination, and perseverance. And, many people will say, oh, you're very passionate about what you do. And I would say, yes, I am to an extent, but that's not what gets you there, Ben. What gets you there is the perseverance, the drive. I think for me, I have an unbelievable drive, and I'm quite happy to put in 12, 13-hour days back to back and then, go for a ride or put everything on hold and put my family very much at the center of that balance. But I'm very fortunate, and I understand how privileged I am. I don't step away from that privilege. I understand that that's not something that everyone has access to. But what everyone has access to is, particularly in an age now of technology, everyone can educate themselves. And it can be as simple as getting on ChatGPT and saying, I'm interested in doing XYZ. Can you give me some advice? And, based on those prompts, it can inspire you to try something new. So don't be afraid to try for something new. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And, really, I think, have those big goals and don't set limits on yourself.
I love it. I love it. Now, Vanessa, where can people find more about you online? And also, too, I'd like you just to run through, you've got a podcast as well.
I do. I have a podcast called Fashion to Farmer, which we've had a bit of a break, actually, because I just got so flat out. But season 1 is on Spotify or Apple and other podcast platforms. So you can find us there, and we're kicking off production soon. My producer is actually over in Scotland. He keeps sending me emails like, when's season 2 coming? So that is coming. And then our website is vanessa-bell.com. And I'm very open to people following me on LinkedIn or reaching out through Instagram. So that's at Vanessa Bell Official on Instagram, or for podcasts and just, day-to-day farm shenanigans, you can find me at Fashion to Farmer on Instagram as well. So any emails, info@vanessa-bell.com. And really happy to answer questions. As I said, I'm hosting this masterclass in June, so very happy for any of your listeners to jump on board if they'd like to do that. I do feel like it's important that, beyond just a brand and really advocating for Australian wool growers or anyone in ag really coming up through the ranks, we need to help each other to really, especially as we're heading into a drought again, anything we can do to help.
And so the masterclass, just talk us through that quickly, just what the details are involved and where people can find that too, Vanessa, when it's ready.
So I'll send you a link, which you're able to put in your show notes. Absolutely. Perfect. And it'll be held via Zoom. So you're open to being an attendee from anywhere in Australia. And, I had the heading out there, and do you think I've written it down to tell you what it is now? But no, I mean, the essence of it will be very much around finding your voice and being able to, from a media and PR and marketing perspective. So again, it's any of those, not necessarily young people. You could be 65 wanting to start your first business. That's completely fine. But it's very much in that capacity of being able to show people how they can really own their own journey and take that forward in business.
Awesome. I love your energy. I love your story. It's unique, and I love the fact that you're humble enough to say you're grateful for what opportunities you've been given, and you're now just capitalizing and using those to the best of your ability, which I think is a great philosophy. And I love the fact that you're values driven, Vanessa. So before we wind this up, is there any one last thing you'd like to leave everyone, a little bit of Vanessaism or a little bit of advice or something else you'd like to get across?
Well, thank you very much, Ben, firstly. That's very kind of you to say. But I think just to leave everyone, bringing it back to, I suppose, that key topic of the podcast, I would really remind everyone that it's really about understanding the full journey of what you produce and being really intentional about where you participate in that journey. And then, if you're really on farm, I think it's about trying to keep that value on farm versus just letting it head off through that farm gate. And I remember this is back in the previous drought, and I had a station called Wachillaba, which was on the Kidman Highway out sort of northwest of Condobolin between Mount Hope and Cobar, which Mount Hope is a place I refer to as No Hope. But anyway, I remember I had to go up to the Cobar post office, and I remember standing there with a baby blanket in my hands, and I was sending it off to Geneva. and all through Instagram. And I remember just having this aha moment that, here I am in the middle of the, northwestern New South Wales, sending off something that I created from my kitchen table right through to turning it. So taking that product from your front paddock to a global marketplace is possible. It's so possible.
Yep. And as you mentioned before, with artificial intelligence, AI, the information, the advice, the guidance, and the opportunities are off the scale now. So, yeah, that's some great advice. And it must be a hell of a mind shift to think that's the opportunity that's open to us now. So, look, Vanessa, thank you for everything today. I really enjoyed that story. I got some great notes there, and I think everyone listening will have got some really good value.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been such a pleasure to be here, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's a cracking story. Vanessa's obviously got oodles of energy and drive and motivation, as she said, and a lot of self-belief, which is really, really critical in becoming a solid entrepreneur. One thing I just want to leave you guys before you go is I want you to really take this point to heart. And that is, if you listen to Vanessa, she always talked about her ability to build connections and meet people. She talked about the job role she had when she was younger, working in the financial advice firm, and then when she went into the marketing, being able to deal with people. That's the one thing that I'd love all the next generation to realize, is that you don't have to have the connections. You just got to learn to build them. So get out there, put yourself out there, learn how to build relationships with people, because that's where the opportunities will come. The more you put yourself out there, the more people you get exposed to off the farm, and entrepreneurial people, and especially older people that are willing to help, the more opportunities will come your way. So just want to say thanks to Vanessa. If you want to go to her masterclass, the details will be in the show notes. I think that'd be great for anyone that's trying to find their voice. And until next time, I'm Ben Law. I'm the Financial Bloke. And remember, it's more important who you are than what you've got. I'll see you next time.
The number one reason succession plans fail and family relationships are permanently damaged is a breakdown in communication. Because when families don't know how to have the hard conversations, trust erodes, resentment builds, and silence does the damage. The families who preserve wealth and protect relationships make succession look easy because they don't just focus on structure and strategies. They build the communication skills to make clear decisions, manage emotions, and protect trust before the pressure hits. That's why I use world-class communication expert Katie Godden in our high-performing families community. Katie's communication training program, Grassroots Communication, teaches the exact skills top families in ag use to increase trust, increase family alignment, and strengthen long-term relationships. If you want to get ahead of the game, head on over to katiegodden.com/grassroots and use the code AGRICOACH for 15% off. Because the conversations you avoid today create the problems you inherit tomorrow.